Hi, friends. Let me get my mic. Happy full moon. We just had a full moon, and oh my gosh, that full moon was really crazy for me. I feel like it started off like a few days before I was super exhausted and really, really tired and had like very little inspiration and couldn't like just do anything. And then all of a sudden now I have this like renewed energy and I feel full of like positivity and inspiration and whatnot. So I don't know. Is anybody else feeling that? Because I feel like it's just been a powerful full moon, but it is the final full moon of the year. So I'm excited to close this year out. But um, what I was thinking a lot about and wanted to bring attention to was the topic of the dark feminine. Um, we have, I don't know if you can really see it, but I have Lilith and Hecate over here. But I wanted to talk about the dark feminine because I really think that that is the vital key piece to liberating the feminine. And if we ever really want to move ourselves forward, then as women, or as somebody who's just healing their feminine energy, it's imperative that we actually address the dark feminine because I actually really think that the dark feminine is the root of this whole kind of power dynamic issue between the feminine and the masculine. So I guess to begin with, like what is the dark feminine? The dark feminine is sort of, I think, like the most primal, raw form of feminine energy, right? When you think like in Hinduism, there's Kali. And if you haven't seen a picture of her, she's like this terrifying goddess who has like blood dripping all over her and she like kills gods and goddesses for fun and she's this terrifying. I remember when I was a kid growing up, I was always terrified of her. I was like, oh my god, like this is a god. She's so, I mean, goddess, she's so scary. But there's so much symbolism behind that, which is that the dark feminine is like the most primal form of the creative force of the universe, right? The ability to die and then rebirth itself and regenerate itself into something bigger. The ability to be aware of when something needs to die, like having that discernment and that intuition to recognize that something is not in my alignment or some cycle has completed itself and now I need to actually let it die, right? And that's a whole other topic. I think, like, especially in Western culture, we've lost the art and the ritual of death. So that's a whole other like conversation, I feel like. But part of reclaiming the dark feminine though is learning how to reconnect with death rituals and learning how to fully allow yourself to dissolve into your inner death and rebirth cycles. And the dark feminine energy is all about, feeling the strength and the potency and, that all-consuming force of the feminine, the deepest, most darkest places of your emotions, parts of yourself that you've allowed yourself to reject. Um, and getting engulfed in it and not being afraid of that, right? And that's the part of the feminine that has been the most rejected. I think when you talk about like the collective consciousness, I think the dark feminine is the most sort of cast out archetype out of everything. And that's with purpose because the dark feminine is so powerful. She has the ability to let things die instantly and to also regenerate things in a way that's almost, doesn't make sense to the ego or to the mind. And because of that, as women, we're forced into these boxes where, we're rewarded for this hyper femininity, for these loose boundaries, these low standards, for making ourselves small and only ever dreaming of like taking care of people. And for me, as someone who has always like I've always actually felt more connected to the dark feminine than light feminine, and sometimes I really like dream of being a teenager again because I feel like my teenage years I was so connected to that dark feminine energy. I feel like I had such strong boundaries, these high standards, these big dreams for myself. I was so quick to be like, if somebody wronged me, like not cutting them out of spite, but recognizing that, like, okay, I don't want this person in my life and just moving on from it. And I miss that. But part of the trauma that I experienced, and this was kind of like the important thing that I wanted to talk about because I think we all experience it, is that when you are in your dark feminine energy at some point in your life, maybe you expressed to people you had these high standards for the life they wanted to create. Maybe you just had really intense dark emotions. Maybe you're just super intuitive. Maybe you are a very intelligent person. Maybe you're a very beautiful person in tune with this like sexual energy, right? Like anything that really resonates with dark feminine energy at some point in your life as a female or as somebody who's radiating that dark feminine energy, you will learn that it's too much, Like you will learn that the world thinks your dark feminine energy is too much and you won't even realize it, but just slowly, action by action, you'll learn to make that dark feminine energy small and you'll cast yourself out. And so then you disconnect yourself from the most powerful parts of yourself. And I really think that dark feminine energy, like the core of it is sexual energy because sexual energy is the energy of creation, of death and rebirth, right? And that's like a whole topic too, which is like we talk about sexual energy and we talk about like the physical aspect of it, and that's just like the outward expression of it. But really behind all of that, when you talk about what is sexual energy, it's the ability to kind of merge into consciousness. And through that merging, like when you merge with another person or with a dream that you have or with an emotion that you have or an experience that you're having, whatever it is, through the merging, like through you piercing every layer of the illusion and getting to the core of that experience and allowing yourself to really like dissolve and melt into that experience, you birth a higher consciousness, right? So like for example, let's say you have a dream to create something, and that dream is kind of like you're getting these ideas, you're feeling these sensations, and you feel something like waking up inside of you, like this is a dream that I have that I want to manifest in this world, right? In order to get into the core of that dream and to really feel it and like blossom into it, you have to pierce through all of the layers of trauma and drama that are surrounding that dream. So like the fear of being seen, fear of success, fear of failure, whatever it is, right? You have to peel back all of those layers of trauma in order to fully allow yourself to merge into that dream. And when you do finally get to the core of that dream and you feel it and you let yourself merge and dissolve and like drown in that dream, that's when it starts manifesting, right? That's when you start creating this third consciousness that starts to actually create something from your physical vessel and you start birthing things, whether it's physically like a human being or birthing other things into the world, like ideas or, forms of self-expression, whatever the case. And so anyways, getting back to the point, that sexual energy is the core of dark feminine energy. And it's what, as women, we have such a strong connection to, right? Because our bodies are naturally built that way. Our bodies are naturally connected to something beyond that has the ability to literally take consciousness and birth it into the world. And so we have that is our currency, that is our potency, but we learn at a very young age to reject it, and we learn that that dark feminine energy is too much, right? Like a number one example is like as a woman you get sexualized so early, and I could talk about forever the effects that has on your mind, and I think in your psyche as a woman you'll probably spend a huge chunk of your life having to undo that, if not like a lifelong journey. Because I mean, first of all, a lot of us have trauma from as children, right? So we were sexualized as children, which you can imagine how much that affects your psychology. But then if that wasn't your experience, it probably starts in like middle school, right? Getting objectified and sexualized by not only people your age. I feel like people your age is I mean, still not okay, but I think part of growing up is when you're around, other people your age and you're exploring your sexuality. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about unhealthy objectification, which usually typically happens as a young woman and older men. Um, Young women are the number one targets of this patriarchal society because if you could indoctrinate a young woman who's still growing before her brain has fully developed, then you can convince her to reject all of her power, right? And then she becomes the perfect little robot that you can control. And so as I evolve and get into my like late 20s, I look back and I realize like, holy shit, being a young woman is like such a vile experience. It is such a horrendous experience. You just get so objectified. And as I was saying before, like you get sexualized at such a young age that in your head you start to objectify yourself and dehumanize yourself, and you start to think that, people see you as an ends to a mean, and even if it's not in a really obvious way, it's in like the micro transactions that you have with people, it's in the dynamics that you have with people. You can tell, like you can, intuitively tell when somebody is just kind of seeing you for what you offer versus who you are as a human being, and that feeds into that dynamic of I have to perform and I have to make myself small, because if I make myself too, if I'm my full self, then I'm too much, right? And that's kind of like the ultimate conclusion that I wanted to come to, is that a lot of times we think that our fear is of not being enough, but I think that as women and as women who are on the journey of recollecting the dark feminine, the original wound was actually a wound of being too much. And then we started masking, we started making ourselves small, we started doing all of these things to cast ourselves out. And so we learned over time to believe that we were not enough because we felt disconnected from our authentic selves. And when you feel disconnected from your authentic self, you're going to feel very disconnected from that abundant feeling of life force energy, disconnected from that infinite experience of, God, soul, whatever you want to call it, universal consciousness. And so you're going to feel that experience of like, I feel like I'm not enough. I feel like I'm so small, right? It's because you're making yourself small. But why are you making yourself small? You're making yourself small because you were taught to believe that you were too much. Um, and there comes some point where you have to reclaim that and you have to go on this journey of going into the super, super deepest, darkest corners of your own psyche to reclaim that dark feminine energy. Because I think for a lot of us, the light feminine is not as hard to embody because it's rewarded. It's what we're told we should be. And you get treated better for that. But as somebody, like I said before, who always felt like I had more of this dark energy, um, I've always gotten so many reactions and projections from people, and that was what I learned to do to make myself small, right? Because people would always say that they were so intimidated by me, or that, people would think that I thought I was all that, or that my standards were too high. I got that a lot. People are sexualizing you all the time and turning you into this like object, and it's just like, you could tell people treat you a lot differently when you're embodying your dark feminine energy. And for me, that was who I was, right? And so I learned to make myself small. And this morning I was just journaling and I was like, I don't want to live like that anymore because when you fully embody your dark feminine, like when I remember being in that energy a lot more when I was younger, it's so empowering and it feels so good. And it just feels like you're in the essence of what it means to be a woman. And you feel like you can create anything. And you feel really connected to like the most, highest form of intelligence in the world, and you really are like a master of your own inner cycles, and you can create and manifest and also kill and detach yourself from anything. You're like just such a strong force, like a phoenix rising from the fire and from the ashes. And so anyways, all of that to say that as women, I think it's crucial, imperative, and completely unavoidable that if you want to be the type of person that's helping to move the feminine collective forward and to bring back the feminine energy to what she was always meant to be, you cannot avoid the work of embodying the dark feminine. I think a lot of people do avoid that work because it's the scariest work to do because she's the most outcast part of the collective consciousness, right? Like Lilith was completely outcasted from, I don't really know too much about the story of Lilith in terms of like the Bible and stuff, but I know that like in general, her story was that she got outcasted from the Garden of Eden for being too much, and for having a sense of power that was beyond what everybody else could accept. And that's, I guess, that's the motivation I'm giving you to embody the dark feminine, to go back. And I think a lot of it actually begins in your teenage years as a woman, because your teenage years are when you first start to get in touch with this feminine energy in a way that's a little bit more, not mature, but wild, right? Like that wild feminine energy starts to come in as a teenager. And as a teenager, because that wild feminine energy is coming through, that dark feminine energy is coming through, you'll start to notice a lot of like patterns, very unconscious patterns of people trying to suppress that wildness inside of you and that expansiveness inside of you. And I think that in your teenage years, like, I think that those years we do not talk about enough as a collective and as a society, because those years are so important, especially as a woman. Like, those years are so formative, and it's the time where you probably get the most traumatized, and your foundation in the way that you start to relate to this newfound feminine energy that's coming through you is really backwards, right? People try to teach you that you should not relate to that energy in a positive way, that you should suppress it, that you should control it, that you're too much, you're too wild, you don't know how to, keep yourself grounded, and you're just all over the place. And it sets you up for a life of rejecting yourself and your feminine energy. And when you live in a patriarchal world, it also doesn't reward you connecting to that energy either, right? And so you come out of your teenage years, and even if you don't experience like really big traumas, every single woman is micro traumatized. Every single one of us is micro traumatized from the different interactions and inequalities that we face, but especially in teenage years, because that's when you're the most vulnerable as a young woman. And that's when you get so much of this messaging that you have to be controlled and tamed, and you're young, you're not an adult yet, so a lot of other adults feel like they can control you and try to project their own feelings of insecurity onto you, and it's just a giant mess. But anyways, all of that to say that I think the beginning of healing that dark feminine energy, of course, is doing the inner child healing work, but we rarely ever talk about the inner teenager healing work. And I think, at least for me, that's been like such a potent aspect of reclaiming the dark feminine, because that's often where she gets disconnected from in the first place, because that's when us, women start to really express this wild energy. So I would highly recommend doing the inner teenager work and starting to undo that connection that you have in your head of sexuality being associated with something that makes you too much, or something that, um, you know, is negative, as well as your boundaries and your standards and your intuition, all these other traits of the dark feminine. And I'm really curious if you're on that journey of reclaiming your dark feminine energy. I'm so curious, like, what are the things that you've done to overcome that, and what are the experiences that you've had? Like, do you relate to feeling like you were suppressed for it in your life at some point? Like, I'm super curious to know what people's experiences and what their journeys are when it relates to that energy. But yeah, other than that, I hope everybody has a fabulous rest of this full moon energy that's still coming through. And yeah, I shall see you next time. Bye.